Hey everybody, I hope y'all are doing good today. I'm going to tell you the story about how I was able to win a Central Pro-Am event on my home lake of Beaver Lake back in 2004. This was an epic weekend for me right here. I caught so many bass. I caught a huge stringer, I think a little over 35 pounds for 2 days, which was kind of unheard of for Beaver Lake back in the day. And got to be a winner in front of a bunch of some of the greatest anglers in the Ozarks in this regional area. They come from Missouri, Kansas, Oklahoma, Arkansas. These were epic events with some of the greatest anglers, and I'm super fortunate to have been able to win one. So that event was, it was kind of special how this whole day came down. And so I'm going to take you back in time a little bit, and then we're going to come up, work our way up to this event and how this all transpired. Now, through the winter of 2003 into 2004, our lake had gotten quite low, probably lower than it had been in a long time, and it got really cold. It was a pretty strong winter, and the surface temp in the lake had got down into the high 30s, 38, 39 degrees. And me and my team partner, we had been catching bass really well all winter on jerkbait. Through that real cold water into the winter, we've been fishing jackpots and winning most all of them, fishing a jerkbait. And we've been catching those fish off of mainly secondary points and secondary and even what I'd call a thirdary, whatever that means, channel banks going back into these creek arms. So you had all these creek arms that were drawn way down, and if you could find the last deep channel bank, and by deep, I mean it's got 20 plus feet of water on it, coming out of that creek from the back, there was going to be a large group of bass hanging out right there around that deep water spot. And I think it had a lot to do with this, drawing the lake down lower than it had been in a few years. It just had a lot of bass congregated in these little areas all winter. So the weekend before, we'd had a major tournament, and I had begun to catch a few fish in that tournament. We had a great tournament that one as well. I think we ended up fourth or something in a local team trail. But I caught a few bass that weekend on a shad rap along with our jerkbait. So I knew this thing was changing a little bit, and always going into the first 3 weeks of March, that is prime time for me to be throwing a shad rap. And a number 8 shad rap. That's the one I've always used. I'm going to talk about this bait a little more in a minute. But as I went into that tournament, I didn't get to pre-fish the week of the tournament. I'd fished the Sunday prior to it, but I didn't get to fish any the week of the tournament. Now, the lake had been off limits Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. And on Thursday, it came a pretty good rain, like a big rain. And that rain brought the lake up about 2 feet. Now, our lake was so low, it didn't bring it up into the bushes or anything like that. So 2 feet really wasn't this huge factor, but I knew it was a warm rain, and I was a little concerned about it going into the tournament, not getting on the water any. I talked to a few of my buddies, and they said it was super tough. And but I was just like, well, I'm just going to have to go with what I know. And the first day of the tournament, I resolved that I was going to go start out on these jerkbait fish I'd been fishing all winter. I'm like, lake hasn't changed that much. Those fish, there still should be those fish there. I went straight to one of my number 1 channel banks in the back of a major creek, close to Prairie Creek at the takeoff. And I spent about an hour going down this 150-yard stretch of this channel bank, and I never had a bite. Not one, not nothing. It was like there was not a bass anywhere to be caught up this bank. And as I got further up that bank, I could see the water was beginning to change a little bit. The color was changing a little bit from the clear it had been all winter. And I won't lie, I started getting a little jittery. I was like, well, I better start running around and try to figure something out. Beginning to go into that panic mode. But then I just stopped for a second, and I was like, you know what? There has been so many bass right here all winter. They've just moved a little bit. Why don't you keep fishing up this bank towards the back end of this creek and let's see what happens. What's it going to hurt to spend another 30 or 40 minutes working our way onto the back end of this creek? This was the last channel bank before you got to the very back of this creek. Well, on the end of this channel bank, it kind of started to flatten out, and there was a couple of docks there. And when I got up to the shallower part of it, I picked up that shad wrap, and I started fishing up the shallow gravel point that led right into the butt end of this creek. And it was real shallow gravel. Wasn't very long with that shad wrap, and I caught about a 3-pound largemouth. And I was like, oh, hey, maybe we're on to something here. I went up just a little bit further, maybe 25, 30 feet. I caught another one. I got up to another boat dock sitting right on the perfect end of this gravelly point, and I caught 3 off of that boat dock just right quick. So all of a sudden I'm like, man, I think I'm on to something. As I went on into that creek, right in the very back, you could see the water was still running in the back of this creek, and it was coming down a flat, just how they follow a creek down. And there was an old road that went across, and there was 2 bridge old abutments sitting there. They're probably 5 or 6 feet apart. And it's kind of a little deep gut in the middle, and the prettiest blue water you ever could see, just flowing right between those 2 pillars. And then it was blending into the stained water that had come down with the rain. So it's kind of like a milky stain everywhere, but there's beautiful blue water coming down between these 2 pillars. I sung that shad wrap right up there between those 2 pillars, hooked into like a 5-pound class fish, got it up, got all excited, and just pulled the hooks out. And I was like, oh no. Rolled that thing right back up there, caught my biggest fish of the day, a 5-something pounder, may have been the same bass, I don't know. I ended up catching another one, about 4 out of that same bridge thing there. And they were just sitting right in that current where it was mixing with that other water. And from there, you could kind of see how that blue water was coming out between them abutments and kind of beginning to create like a little blue line out through that stain. And I just started fan casting out in the gut of that creek where the old channel kind of faded across the bank a little ways. And holy smokes, it was unbelievable the amount of big bass that were in the back of that creek. It was every bass that had been there all winter back on those other channel banks. They had all moved into the back of this creek and were feeding on shad or anything. And so we just kept fan casting. I think I probably caught 25 keeper bass back there that day, mixed into that, just kind of circling back and around everywhere I'd caught bass. I caught 19.95 pounds of bass back there practically. And then my co-angler had just shy of 14 pounds back there himself. So that's 40 pounds of bass nearly coming out of that one creek, 35 pounds of bass out of there. It was crazy. It was unbelievable. I remember once I held up a 3-pounder and I looked at my co-angler and I said, you're seeing something that never happens on Beaver Lake. And I threw a 3-pounder right over the side because I knew it wouldn't help my stringer any. And so we stayed there as long as we could. You could tell the water was beginning all day. It was getting cleaner and cleaner. And when you're fishing runoffs, you've got to capitalize on the bite that is happening right then. It's not going to be there tomorrow. It's changing. It's an ever-changing thing. When the writer that was writing that article in the magazine had asked me about those fish, if I found them in pre-fish, I said no. And I said nobody else did either. And I said the only reasoning for that is these bass were not there on Friday. They had moved in there on Friday night, or somebody would have been in there fishing for them too. So I think people had fished into that creek and those fish weren't there yet. But Saturday, they had moved in there and we capitalized on them. And I told my co-angler, I said, tomorrow we'll be hard pressed to catch any out of here. But, So I left that creek, went over to another large creek called Prairie Creek, and went in the very back of it. It's very similar to the one I was fishing. And thought, I've always caught really, really big fish in there. I thought maybe I could cull with a big one. I spent the last hour and a half of the day in there. I did catch 3 more keepers in there, and I did cull 1 fish in there late in the day that helped kind of top off my stringer. And that was the end of the day, and I was leading the tournament the first day. A little bit nervous going to the second day because I knew this was probably a fleeting thing that I had going on. So I went straight back there the next day, started in there with my shad wrap, caught a really good, my biggest fish today right off the bat. The water was way cleaner then. They'd been, clear blue water been running in there all night long. And you could tell all that back area where all those fish was at was beginning to turn blue. And when that water gets clear, they'll scatter out of there. They want to work around where that stain is mixing with that clear. And so I end up having to change baits a little bit, and changed up to another one of my most favorite baits in the early spring. I'm gonna talk about both of these baits in a minute, but that was an LBR 500. And I just began to fan cast this around what was left of that stained water in there. I was able to finish, probably 13.5 pound limit in there. Probably caught 8 or 9 keepers that day still. But this was the key bait that next day. It was a little bit faster mover than the Shad Rap. And so I finished the day with it. I went out after that. It was about 11 o'clock. It was done in there. It was all clear blue. The fishing was over. There wasn't a bite to be had. So it was a really windy day. I went out and spent the rest of the day throwing my Shad Rap on the main lake in a crawfish colored crankbait, just like we do in the Ozarks all the time. And I was able to cull 2 more fish out there to kind of wrap up my day. And it worked out fine. In the Ozarks, if you can get windy days in the spring, you can catch them on the main lake cranking. And that's what I did the rest of the second day. I was able to catch 15 some odd pounds the second day and win that tournament with 35 pounds and something, which is a big stringer of bass for Beaver Lake back in those days, and to win that event and a nice fat paycheck too. So it was epic day, epic weekend. I'll tell you a little bit more about the bait I was throwing. This has been one of my favorite baits of all time in early March, and that's a number 8 Shad Rap. Now, a lot of people think the 8's a little too big, but over the years, this has by far been the best bait I've ever used in the early part of March. This bait doesn't catch small fish. This bait catches big fish. If you're targeting big pre-spawn largemouth, the number 8 Shad Rap, man, it's hard to beat. I will not go fishing in early March without this bait. Now, the bait I was fishing, I drill it, as you can see there, and weight it. And I get these baits to suspend perfectly. And that's the bait I was using. I was using it on a 7-foot fiberglass rod with a Shimano Corrado reel, just like the ones I still use today, and a 6:4 to 1 gear ratio, just fishing slow and easy. Now, I was just casting this bait up to that gravel, around them docks, around that area where that mud, the stain and the clear water was mixing. And then later, I was fishing it out around channel banks and stuff like that the second day later on. Same, just same bait. And then the other bait was this LVR, Lucky Craft, LVR 500. Now, this is a 5/8 ounce bait, but it has the profile of a 1/2 ounce bait or a little bit. It's been a really great bait for me. Anytime I'm on a bite, like the Shad Rap bite, sure enough, the Shad Rap. If I'm throwing a Shad Rap, I will have a vibrating bait of some sort, whether it's this LVR 500, a rattle trap, anything of that nature. This one's been a really good one for me. I like the weight of it. It stays down really easy on a pretty quick retrieve, and I like that. And it has a really good solid sound to it with the lead and glass beads in it. Been a really good bait for me. So this was the bait that really helped me the second day finish up my limit and get to cull a little bit, was this bait. So that's how I caught them. It was an epic weekend. And it goes back to the video I made a couple of days ago about not leaving those fish. Maybe I learned my lesson after that tournament that day, me and Chad, but on that channel bank, it would have been really easy early that morning and not had a bite in the first hour or so, and to just bailed on everything and took off all over the lake. But fortunately enough, I was able to keep my cool enough to say, I'm just going to head on up this. These bass were here. They've moved, and they've made an adjustment to the conditions. I need to make an adjustment to the conditions. And so I just kept on fishing up onto that flat, and there they were. Every bass in that creek was in the back of there feeding during that little window. And you've really got to pay attention to that kind of stuff. So next time you ain't getting the bites and you know they're there, just start looking. You're going to find them there somewhere. And the other thing, you better be paying attention to these warm runoffs we're having over the next few weeks, because you will run into the biggest bunch of largemouth bass or whatever species of bass in the backs of that runoff. And when you get on them, make hay. Don't worry about saving them for tomorrow because they're not going to be there. Catch them while you can. Capitalize on that bite. It'll be epic. I won another large tournament a few years after this one on the same kind of bite, same kind of thing. It can be epic. It can also be like last weekend at Greer's. You don't catch nothing. So, hope that helps you some. I hope you enjoyed the story. We'll catch you next time.